Today, we're taking a trip back to the absolute peak of the Cold War to get inside the mind of the Soviet military. But here's the twist. We're not going to use Soviet sources. Nope. Our guide for this is the U.S. Army's very own field manual from 1984. This was the document designed to teach American soldiers exactly how their biggest adversary thought, how they organized, and how they fought. So, our mission is to decode that massive war machine using the very same intelligence its opponent was using to get ready for a fight.
And this quote from the manual, wow, it gets right to the heart of everything. For the Soviets, it was never about just winning a single battle. It was about creating a cascade, a domino effect. Any small tactical win had to be instantly exploited to create a bigger, operational victory, which would then fuel a massive strategic gain. It's a philosophy built entirely on relentless forward momentum. Pretty much everything we're about to look at is built on this one super aggressive idea.
All right, so to really understand this machine, we have to start with its operating system, right? Its core philosophy. The manual has this great term for it, the ghost in the machine. This is the intellectual framework, the software that dictates every single action.
And the central concept here is something they called military art. Now, for the Soviets, this wasn't just some fuzzy, abstract term. Oh no, it was a science. It was a field they studied deeply, and it gave their officers the very vocabulary for how they saw and solved problems on the battlefield. You could say it was the intellectual engine driving the entire Soviet military.
And this military art was applied across three totally distinct but deeply interconnected levels. Yeah, the tactical level, winning the actual firefight, that was designed to serve the operational level, which was all about winning the bigger campaign. And that, in turn, had to serve the strategic level, winning the entire war. For them, it was all one continuous flow, from the smallest squad all the way up to the entire theater of war.
So if you've got a philosophy of cascading success, you need absolute iron-fisted control to make it happen. And that brings us to the brain of the machine, a command structure that the manual describes as a system of tightly centralized control.
Just take a look at this command web for a typical division. Now, you might see the division commander at the top and think he's the one pulling all the strings. But really, the true nerve center, the guy running the whole show, was the chief of staff. He was the main pipeline for every piece of information and the organizer who turned the commander's orders into actual action. Everything, every report, every command flowed through his office.
But here's where things get really different from Western armies. It's the unique roles they embedded right into the command staff. You had a political officer, whose job was to ensure ideological purity and morale. And then you had a KGB section. Literally a secret police unit that didn't even answer to the division commander. Nope, they reported up their own separate chain of command. This created this incredible network of oversight that was all about ensuring total political control at every single level.
Okay, so with that tightly controlled brain locked in place, we can finally look at the machine's main purpose, the hammer. The Soviet military was built from the ground up for the offensive. It was all about deep, violent strikes defined by incredible speed and just overwhelming momentum.
And this right here perfectly illustrates their obsession with momentum. Their #1 preferred method of attack was from the march. That means units would literally roll directly from their travel columns straight into battle, without ever stopping. Now, it was chaotic, sure, and way harder to coordinate, but it maximized shock and surprise. Stopping to get organized and prepare an attack was seen as a last resort, something you only did if you'd already lost the element of surprise.
The ultimate expression of this whole deep strike philosophy was the Operational Maneuver Group, or OMG. This wasn't just a spearhead. Think of it as a self-contained army designed to punch a hole in the front line and then just wreak havoc deep in the enemy's rear areas. They were meant to paralyze the enemy from behind, and they were the key to turning a tactical breakthrough into a complete operational collapse.
And the entire system was just geared for unbelievable speed. Look at these reaction times. Once an order came down, a battalion was expected to plan and launch an attack in as little as 25 minutes. A full division, we're talking thousands of soldiers, hundreds of vehicles, could be on the move in just a couple of hours. The whole thing was built to crush any delays and just maximize tempo.
So how do you feed an advance that's moving that fast? Well, your eyes and ears have to be way, way out in front. Divisional recon units were expected to operate up to 50 kilometers ahead of the main force. Their job was to scout the routes, find the enemy weak spots, and basically pave the way so the hammer could fall without ever having to slow down.
But what if they were the ones who got attacked first? Well, the Soviet defense wasn't some passive wall. It was an active anvil. The goal wasn't just to stop an enemy attack, it was to absorb the blow, channel the enemy into a terrible position, and then absolutely smash them with a powerful counterattack. It was all a trap.
Yeah, a Soviet defense was never just a line on a map. It was a multi-layered trap. It would start with security forces way out front, which would then lead the enemy into a deep, main defensive area just filled with obstacles and pre-planned kill zones. All of this was designed to make the attacker bleed and set them up for the real killer, a massive counterattack by a fresh, powerful reserve force that was just waiting for its moment.
And a core piece of this whole doctrine was the fire sack. And believe me, it's as terrifyingly effective as it sounds. The Soviets would deliberately leave what looked like weak spots in their defenses, using minefields and obstacles to subtly guide an enemy force right into these zones. And once the enemy was inside the sack, they'd unleash a pre-planned, overwhelming storm of artillery from all sides. Just brutal.
They were also absolute masters of using terrain. So, a forward-slope defense is great, right? It gives you amazing views, but it also paints a giant target on your back. The Soviets, they often preferred the reverse-slope defense. This hid most of their forces from direct fire in sight, forcing an attacker to come blindly over the crest of a hill, exposing their vulnerable underbellies to a hidden wall of firepower.
So we've seen the hammer and the anvil, but neither of them works in a vacuum. They're brought together by what you could call the symphony of combined arms, this tight, perfect integration of tanks, infantry, artillery, air power, and even electronic warfare, all working together like one destructive orchestra.
Air power, for example, wasn't just called in whenever. Its role changed in 3 distinct phases. First, you had air preparation, hitting targets deep behind the lines before the ground battle even started. Then it shifted to air support, moving perfectly in sync with the ground troops. And finally, air accompaniment, which meant the jets were basically flying shotgun for the spearheads as they broke through, acting as their own long-range flying artillery.
And this slide really shows you just how tight that coordination was supposed to be. During exercises, the minimum safety distance between their own troops and their own airstrikes could be as little as 200 meters. I mean, that is incredibly close. It shows a doctrine that demanded air and ground forces to operate almost literally on top of each other.
And way ahead of its time, Soviet doctrine included what they called radio-electronic combat, or REC. This wasn't just about jamming some radios. No, this was a whole integrated system designed to find, disrupt, deceive, and ultimately destroy the enemy's entire command and control network. For them, fighting the enemy's communication systems was just as important as fighting their tanks. So, when you bring all these pieces together, you've got the centralized brain with its political officers, the offensive hammer built for relentless speed, the defensive anvil with its deadly fire sacks, and this whole symphony of combined arms. You get this picture of a massive, cold, calculated military machine.
But that picture of a perfectly calculated machine, that leads right into the classic stereotype of the Soviet military, doesn't it? That it was this rigid, unthinking force where individual initiative was completely crushed. But is that actually what the U.S. Army's own experts believed? Was there any room for flexibility in this super centralized system?
Well, the manual's answer is actually really nuanced and fascinating. It basically says that flexibility was a privilege of rank. Down at the lowest levels, battalions, companies, platoons, yeah, there was very little freedom. You followed the plan, period. But as you moved up the chain of command to the commanders of regiments, divisions, and armies, much more flexibility and initiative were not only allowed, but expected.
Now look, this manual is a 40-year-old snapshot of a military that doesn't even exist anymore. But the ideas inside it, deep battle, operational art, integrated electronic warfare, that constant tension between centralized control and battlefield initiative, those ideas are timeless. So the final question we have to ask ourselves is this: where do we see the echoes of this Cold War thinking on the battlefields of today?